So this week's session is slightly different to the other ones we've had. We're not dealing with a specific text here. That's not what this is about. This is, as you can see up here, about the extract questions that you get on Most of You Here, Macbeth, and A Christmas Carol. And what I'm trying to do there is think about how you can use the extract part of it. I'm not thinking about the whole piece, just the extract part of it at a really high level. Now, as you know, these sessions are largely about me trying to get people up to level 6 on their answers, or as close to it as possible. And this is our level 6 descriptor here on the mark scheme. Now, the things that I point out to you more than anything else are that within AO1, what we're looking at, it comes back to this word I use every week, conceptualized, and that's going to apply to the extract as well. Looking from a conceptualized point of view, not just bits and pieces from it, and being critical and exploratory as well. The importance of choosing references judiciously, making a judgment as to which ones are the most effective to follow up what you're doing. And the analysis in AO2 of writers' methods, clearly, in particular, that word analysis, that kind of forensic analysis, but it's not language. We're not in GCSE language here, okay? So it's really more about the details, and particularly this idea of the word methods. We are looking at what the writer does, and that's the number one thing I'm going to come to you and work on with you here today in this idea of dealing with the extract. We are not dealing with what happens in the extract. We are dealing with how it is put together by the writer. The majority of your AO2 will come from the extract in these questions, okay? When you refer to the rest of the text, it's mostly going to be 1 and 3. Majority of AO2 will come from the extract, so we need to get that there. But I also want you to notice that on the right-hand side, again, put there for examiners, how to arrive at a mark tells you how to get to the top of the level. Now, one thing I will say to you, which is to quote the chief examiner, there I go, on name drop, who I see once a year. To quote the chief examiner in dealing with this, there are a lot of ways to get to a level 6. Okay, it's not just one way. What we're looking for is that kind of inspiration and analysis that we that characterizes something exceptional. So when you look at this definition of it, it obviously is quite broad. It covers most of what we've just said here at the top of the level, but I want you to just focus on this little sentence here. There will be a fine-grained and insightful analysis of language form and structure, supported by judicious use of surface terminology. It's this idea, language form and structure is just basically any technique that's being used. Don't worry about the individual details. But a fine-grained and insightful analysis, and I think what that means, a fine-grained analysis, take it to almost a literal meaning. Imagine you've got a bunch of grains in front of you and you're trying to see the makeup of them. You are literally looking grain by grain, okay? You're looking to see what stands out, what's important, what's significant. And that's what we're trying to get out of it here. Okay, so first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the way I would suggest you approach this question, focusing on the moment when you analyze the extract. At the end, I will take you into a bit of the writing as well, what it looks like in writing, so you get a sense of what we're trying to do there. Now, there's the question. It's printed on the sheets you've got there. Now, the problem we get in a lot of cases here is those first 4 words. Because it says starting with this extract, when this appears in front of you, many of you will literally just do that and go straight to the extract. That is not the best way to create a conceptualized answer. It's only starting with this extract. That's how you're going to do the answer. You're going to start with the extract. It's not how you're going to come up with an answer to the question. What I would always say for you to do is to look at it and think to yourself, how does this work across the whole book, the whole novel? Now, in order to do that, We do need to be aware of the extract, okay? And there's a few questions I'd ask right at the beginning of myself with it. I'd look at it and say, right, where does the extract come from? Now, that's always printed on the page, of course, but your revision should help you know this anyway, even within the stage. You should see straight away this is stage 3. You should be able to identify without reading it particularly, just seeing clearly what it is, that this is the section in which the Ghost of Christmas Present takes Scrooge around before they get to any specific families. They're on the streets, okay? They're on the streets seeing people coming past. I've then also asked myself, what comes immediately before this? What has literally just happened before the steeples call good people all to church and chapel? Okay. Well, it's the lists, isn't it? Those interminable lists of food that are found on the streets. Okay. So it's very much a thing about the food, the shops, what's there available for them during the day. And we know that food is a very major issue. So it's kind of like they do the shopping and then they go to church. That's what I'm thinking about. And then I'd also think, what comes immediately after this? Well, literally straight after this comes one of those strange passages I wouldn't really comment on. That one where he starts talking about Sunday trading. I think for Dickens goes a bit strange. But what it then leads into very quickly is the Cratchits. Therefore, what he's talking about here does have a direct connection to that idea of the Cratchits and their poverty. I do this to kind of like, it's like a signposting. I want to see where I am. I want to almost take a satellite picture of where exactly am I in the book, okay, for this bit. That then takes me back to answering the question. And I want to remove now this idea of starting with extracts. I've got what the extract is in my head, but I want to ask myself the question, how does Dickens present attitudes towards Christmas in the novella? I want that conceptualized answer. And in fact, it's pretty much going to change to a question like, well, what is Dickens trying to say about attitudes towards Christmas in this novella? Because I want to identify those to begin with, right? So, changing from how to what allows me to conceptualize. Now, remember, this word conceptualize is about deciding what overall big idea is he trying to grab and say to us about Christmas and about attitudes towards Christmas. This is a Christmas carol. Therefore, it is central to what we're talking about. And this is where your knowledge of it is vitally important. Well, just to give you an example, this is probably where I'm going for, okay? I'm suggesting that throughout, he shows us examples that people who allow the Christmas into their heart are happy. So he's trying to say to us, allowing Christmas into your heart brings joy. And he shows us that for poor and wealthy alike. Therefore, it doesn't matter the circumstance you're in, Christmas will bring you joy. So that is a quite conceptual answer to the idea of Christmas. Christmas is something that brings joy to everybody, if you allow it into your heart. But any of you who've ever worked with me on this kind of thing before will know that I have very much an approach at the beginning here, which I refer to as the something but something idea, which is where whenever I'm answering a question on literature, the first thing that comes up, which is allowing Christmas into your heart, bring joy, whatever the circumstances, that's my first answer. Great, that's it. But then to allow me to look at this in more depth, to consider deeper interpretations, I say, but, and just literally doing that makes me go a bit deeper. And that's what's happened here. But what I'm seeing is, that may be true, he's therefore using Christmas to demonstrate the possibilities of society. So yes, we see that Christmas brings joy if you allow it in your heart. But the bigger point he's making is not really about Christmas. It's saying Christmas is an example. If we do this, if we do what we do at Christmas, then society can be more caring and inclusive. So I have a conceptual approach there. What's the significance of Christmas? The attitudes to Christmas. What does it do if you bring Christmas into your heart? Do you have that attitude? And taking that a bit further, what do those attitudes represent? Where do they go a bit further? All from the idea of how the book works. Okay, now that I have my overall answer for the entire book, and I know it fits with the extract because I've thought about it and what comes around it, I know it's fitting in with that, I go back to it. And this is the main bit that I'm focusing on today. How do we take a section like this and analyze it effectively so that what we are doing is using a fine-grained analysis, to see what Dickens is doing in his writing. Now, one of the benefits of A Christmas Carol is that Dickens is a very stylistic writer. He really uses some very clear stylistic techniques all the way through, and that makes it quite easy to refer to. Now, there are past masterclass lectures that I've done in previous years, which you'll find on the YouTube site, in which I explore some of those, like particularly the use of the narrative voice, the narrator in there. But that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to see how he's doing it. And I'm going with the idea of those two things that I've picked out as well. I'm looking for them. I'm looking for how he does those. So you can see here, to help you, I've color-coded the things that I've picked out to go with the two different ideas that I'm going with. Okay? So the ones that are in yellow, this is where he is associating joy and happiness with the activities of Christmas. That's what I found. That was my answer. Let it in your heart, and you will feel joy, whatever the circumstance. So I'm finding examples where joy and happiness are linked directly to Christmas and Christmas activities, and that's what's going on in these. I've noted that those activities extend to actually talking about the street itself, as though the street is allowing joy into its heart. The pavement smoked as if its stones were cooking too. Okay? So what I can see is in this extract, for that point I'm making about joy coming into your heart, allowing Christmas to bring joy into your heart, I'm saying that this is what we see. The joy and happiness of Christmas associated, even the street itself appears to be that way. And then I think to myself, so how does that link in with the rest of the novel, where it's going? Well, in stage 3, I would be aware that Scrooge changes already. That's also another previous lecture I've done about changes in Scrooge, where I argue that Scrooge changes very early on in the book. And I'd say it clearly changes already in him. So we can see that that's something that will link to him. And I want to link it to his behavior in stage 5, because it's very similar to some of the things that we're seeing here. So I'm thinking, how does this develop over the rest of the book? Either up till now or up to afterwards, when I'm picking out the rest of it. Not just can I think of somewhere else in the book where I see something similar. How does this idea of joy and happiness linking with Christmas work in the rest of the book? In this stage, we already see that Scrooge is on his way. And in stage 5, we see that he is beginning to behave very much like this. Now, what about the other side? What about the green here? Well, remember, my other point was a broader one. It's about how it's not really just Christmas. Christmas is an example of what can happen. So what I'm looking at here is I'm saying in this extract, there is a section here where there's a little bit of angriness. And we see the ghost resolve it. Okay, put a bit in there. So therefore, what we can see is the impact that Christmas spirit can have on conflict. So we're seeing something, a broader issue, how this kind of spirit can affect issues of conflict. And then down the bottom, just added in. And again, if you want to think intelligently about these things, think to yourself, why have they given me this extract? Why is it starting there? Why is it finishing here? Well, they want to get in that bit about poverty at the bottom, where he says, what do you spring from your torch? Is there a particular flavour, my own? Would it apply to any kind of dinner? To any that's kindly given, but to a poor one the most? Why to a poor one the most? Because it needs it the most. So we've got two bigger issues here, conflict and poverty, that are both impacted on by the spirit of Christmas. Do you see how that fits with my second conceptual point that I came up with to begin with? I think about the rest of it. I think about the possibilities that we see of wealthy people who are generous elsewhere in the book. For example, up to this point, we've seen the portly gentleman at the beginning. People who are wealthy, but are giving up their time and their energies at Christmas to actually do something about poverty. We have Fezziwig and his party, where he shows his generosity, brings in people. I remember there is that list of all the people who come to his party that starts up with his family and the people who work for him, and then all the way down to just some boy living over the road. They're all accepted in there. Again, this idea that there is no conflict between different groups at Christmas. People like Fezziwig bring people together. And maybe even Scrooge in the final chapter as well, the final stave as well. It's amazing how often I come back to that with any answer, because we see once again he becomes generous and therefore has a massive impact. And I think they're focusing on the impact he has on Tiny Tim. So what I'm going for is the idea that it's basically a lot of possibilities of the wealthy here. But again, I could potentially go to the idea that in stave 4, which of course comes immediately after this, we see an immediate contrast with the horror. It's almost a dystopian. It's almost a dystopian description of the world. Those of you who are here when I did the Christmas Carol lecture a few weeks back, I was talking about this. It's almost a dystopian world at stave 4, where nobody really appreciates Christmas, okay, and everything's going wrong. And again, if we compare to that, we see the impact the Christmas spirit can have by not being there. So I've got my overall conceptual answer for the whole book. I've applied it to this extract and found how it's done in this extract. And I've pulled out things to do with the rest of it. All looks good so far. But now I want to get into this fine-grained analysis of methods. Right. So I've picked out the top here. The very first sentence. But soon the steeples called good people all. The sentence begins with a conjunction. You've all been told many times before, you can't begin a sentence with a conjunction. Think of the impact of doing that. But right at the beginning, as though there's something more important there. It creates that sense of pace and energy. And so does the listing. People flock through the streets in their best clothes, with their gayest faces, from scores of by streets, lanes, nameless turnings, innumerable people. And talking about listing is an easy gift for you when you talk about Christmas Carol, because literally Dickens does it on almost every page. Okay? He loves to list and create pace and energy through that. So that's what I'm saying. We know that at the beginning here, he's associating joy and happiness with Christmas. How's he doing it? He's doing it, for example, there through this use of a conjunction to begin and this use of listing, all of which are deliberately creating that sense of pace and energy, creating that sense of joy while people are doing things to do with Christmas, particularly in this case, going to church and coming out of church with their dinners there. I've also noted he's personifying the churches as calling people. The steeples called good people to church and chapel. So again, I'm forensically looking at how he's constructed this. It's not language analysis. It's looking at how a writer is creating this. So the churches come to life and call people, but look who they call. They call only, apparently, the good people. There you go. Now that fits in very much with the people who welcome the joy of Christmas into their hearts. They are the people called and called by churches. And that would join in with this point about the role of Christianity in A Christmas Carol. It's not at the heart of it. It's not a religious book, but it has a Christian sensibility behind it. So therefore, that's significant and important and can be used that way. And then down here, I mentioned before that I've noted that it's almost like the streets are joyful. The pavement smoked as if its stones were cooking too. So what's happening here? The idea of bringing the pavement to life as though the streets have to join in as well. It's so much joy going on around there. Now you can see this is the definition of looking closely at what's in there. I'm not technique spotting. I'm spotting what he's doing and just using that language, conjunction, listing, personification. I'm just using that because that's what he's doing. If I'm sitting there writing about this and I forget what personification is, sure you wouldn't, but if you get what it is, and I just talk about the fact that he's treating the churches as though they've come to life, right, as though they're alive or as though they're people, it doesn't cost me any marks at all. Okay? It's just shorthand for writing. So it's really about seeing what's he doing, how's he doing it. There's plenty more up there I could go with, but that will be enough because it is only a 45-minute answer. So it fits in there with those two things that we're looking at. Right, and what about the second part, the green? So once again, down the bottom, this thing about poverty. How does he present it? Well, through dialogue. It's a dialogue he's chosen to put it through. It's not written as Scrooge observed that he seemed to be giving this to poor people more. None of that. He has a conversation between them, a choice. So I stop and think to myself, why? Well, does it suggest that there's kind of expertise? Does it suggest that Scrooge is learning from the ghost? Because it appears, it's almost like a dialogue, isn't it, between teacher and student. Why do you do this? Okay. Would it apply to this? He's trying to learn. So again, I think that is very carefully showing this idea of how poverty can be addressed. There's a man here, a ghost here, who is an expert in what's going on and shows you that they need them the most. And then we went to the impact that the Christmas spirit can have on conflict up here. And we go to this point about angry words between some dinner carriers contrasted with the good humour being restored. So that's what I'll go with. I'll go with the contrast between the two groups of words. I don't have to spot a specific technique. Angry words become good humour when Christmas gets involved, when the ghost Christmas present gets involved. In other words, when Christmas is part of what's going on. Angry words can go. Conflict could be resolved. Okay? So, what hopefully that shows you, as well as the process I've gone through, these last two ones, it's looking, what am I looking for? I mean, there's masses in there, but I can't use all of it. Got to be realistic with this. And to be honest, that preparation there, if we started writing it, I'm not going to use all of that either in the time. I'm going to be very, very careful on my time, and I'm going to make sure that I move on to the second point, the green point here, about halfway through, or just over. It allows me to make my 2 points. It allows me to use these techniques I'm talking about, starting from a conceptualized point and looking at what Dickens is doing. Now remember, of course, I've got to then link those in to those ideas I've got later on. But I don't need to forensically deal with Dickens' approach if I'm looking at elsewhere. I can just talk about moments. I can talk about things that happen. I can talk about just really the structure of it, how it changes. That's fine, because I'm showing that through the extract, and that's what they expect. Now, obviously, actually, I don't even think this is a particularly great extract to use. I think most of the extracts I've used so far have been much easier to use than this. So it's not the most obvious one. But some of you may be sitting there thinking, well, you know, it's got clear things in there. Well, you just have to look for it. There's clear things in everything that they use. Okay? And it has to link with that question. And there's one little thing that has to come in my mind all the way through this, and that is that it's not about Christmas, it's about attitudes to Christmas. And you can see all the time I'm thinking about the attitudes of particular people to Christmas, not Christmas itself. So I'm making sure I'm answering the question. Now, of course, at the same time, you know, there's plenty more going on here with the Ghost of Christmas Present. I have to say, I do worry about the Ghost of Christmas Present sometimes. I don't think he's a particularly great role model. You know, let's face it, how's he dressed? He's pretty much naked, except for a giant green cloak over the top of him, which is worrying to begin with, you know? And there he goes around there. I'm not sure I'd want to be with him if he laughs too much. And the thing pops open. That's bad enough. Then he wanders around with this big torch of his, and when people get angry and get upset, he sprinkles it all like he sprinkles them with it, and suddenly they're all happy. I know something that will do that for you. Let's face it, this ghost could get arrested quite easily. He's a potential dealer, as far as I can see. And if that's not bad enough, at the end of the chapter, underneath his single green cloak, in which he's, you know, naked underneath, out come crawling two children. I'm worried about him. But I wouldn't put that in my answer. I wouldn't put that in my answer, I have to say. It's just a concern. Anyway, I'll just stick to writing about it from the way they want. But I'm sure there is a thesis to be written about the slightly strange portrayal of the Ghost of Christmas Present. Okay. So to bring us to an end here, what I've done, as I say, I've tried to take you through an approach to it. I've tried to say to you certain key things, right? The idea of conceptualizing to begin with, dealing with the extract as a whole, sorry, the text as a whole first. Yeah, sure. We looked at the extract and thought, where's it from? What came just before? What came just after it? So we're familiar with what we're dealing with. But we dealt with the whole text. And then when we dealt with it, I took this something but something idea, come up with my first idea, and then once I've come up with my first response, I go, but what if I go deeper? Okay? Incidentally, one of the main reasons I do that, not just because it provides alternative ideas, but that second point, the but. And yes, there are plenty of good jokes you can make. Stick your butt in there, make sure it's a big butt, all kinds of things like that. If that helps you, do. It works generally with certain year nines I have to work with on it. That but that you put in, which actually ends up turning to however or yet quite often, but you know the point. Because it's made you think that bit further, it's always slightly deeper, it's always slightly tougher. And remember how the marking of this goes. This is essentially a climb up the scale. You start with nothing and you have to prove the skills that you've got. But each time you prove the skill, you can't lose it. So in that first half, the stuff about the joy of happiness and all that kind of thing, I would hope to achieve one of the highest levels. You know, get to the minimum of where I want to go. For many of you here, you'd want to be getting up to level 5 on that opening point. Right, I'll get level 5 there. But then That's where the but is harder, and it will take you on to level 6. That's the idea you're always looking for. You've already secured 5. No point doing loads of more 5s. Look to go on to a 6. So we're prepared for that. Let's have a quick look at how this comes together when you write. So here we go in the beginning. Dickens wants his readers to see that allowing Christmas into your heart brings joy, whatever the circumstance. Following on from showing us the joys of food as a people's shop, see how there, what came immediately before it's helpful. This extract begins with Dickens directly associating the happiness Christmas brings with its activities. Attendance at church and chapel and wearing their best clothes is presented in a breathless list in sentences that begin with conjunctions, generating a sense of pace and energy. Dickens personifies the steeples as calling the good people, creating an idea that religion places goodness at the heart of this. Further describing the scores of roads and innumerable people reminds us the majority of people are happy and Scrooge is in the minority. Now, this isn't from the very beginning. Obviously, the beginning I would set out, you've all been told your thesis statement. My thesis statement will be that first conceptual thing I came up with. Okay, the something but something, right? Let's have a look at how, therefore, this has been put together quickly. Now, first of all, this is what I refer to, I don't know if you've used this term, as a topic sentence. This is then the beginning of the first part of this. A sentence that says, this is what I'm going to say in this section. Allowing Christmas into your heart brings joy, whatever the circumstance. I then place the importance of the extract. What is so important about this extract in answering that question? It's a small detail. I rarely see it from people, but I think it works brilliantly when you do. Most people just go, in this extract we see, but this that points out that this is something where it's a direct association of the happiness and the activities that go with Christmas, which incidentally you'll have noticed is exactly what I wrote on the plan. Now I begin to go into the detail, and I've chosen this one of the idea of church and chapel. I'm wearing their best clothes. These things are presented in a breathless list with the effect an adjective can have in there. Not just in a list, in a breathless list. Just a word to throw in to try and get this idea of the pace and energy. The breathless list in sentences that begin with conjunctions, which generate a sense of pace and energy. I take it further. We would want multiple evidence. And this is where I go to the personification of the steeples. It personifies them as calling the good people, creating an idea that religion places goodness at the heart of this. Notice the significance of the little bit that goes after the comma. A great way of dropping in there, that's the analysis. Yeah? I'm not just pointing out that it's calling the good people. What's the significance of that? It's the idea that religion places goodness at the heart of what we're talking about. Attendance in church and chapel and all that idea. And then, and I've used a semicolon there because this takes that idea a bit further. So rather than making a new sentence, I suggested the two are linked by using a semicolon. Further describing, and again, these kind of connectives further after, take ones that connect some kind of structure thing as to what he's doing, create a sense of it being a controlled idea. Further describing the scores of roads and innumerable people reminds us that the majority of people are happy. That's what scores and innumerable, and Scrooge is in the minority. Obviously, from this point, I would then be thinking about moving on to taking in how this relates to what's to come in the rest of the book. Those ideas I came up with before I move on to my second section. If I had time at this point, I might well now go to the bit about the pavement smoking. But it really does depend if that's what I want and how my time goes. I suppose the point I'm trying to make to you more than anything else here is twofold to do with extracts here. The first is that the extract could well be where you pick up your level 6s, because it allows you to analyse Dickens' method and technique. Not to say I can see he's doing this, but to look at the impact of the way he's writing it. Okay? And the second thing I'm suggesting to you is that you see the extract as part of a broader answer. You start with it, sure, but you've got to have the understanding of the rest of the book. You've got to take it all together as one for it to work. This works exactly the same as Macbeth, okay? Anyway, hopefully that takes you through an idea of something that will give you a bit more confidence with this. I know a lot of you are doing timed essays at the moment in lessons, and hopefully one of these will come up and you can attempt this. You can try this with it. Okay, thank you very much.